A millionaire single dad witnessed his nanny sleeping on the floor, beside his sick child, 2-year-old girl. What he did next shocked. "Sir, I think you need to see this." Bruce Marley looked up from his laptop, annoyed by the interruption. His assistant, Mark, stood hesitantly at the office door, holding a tablet out with trembling hands. Bruce reached for it impatiently. On the screen, a live feed from the nursery security camera showed something that made Bruce's jaw tighten. There she was, the new nanny, the temporary hire from the agency, lying on the floor next to Sophie's crib. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a loose bun, her head resting on a folded towel, one arm stretched through the crib rails. And Sophie, his 2-year-old daughter, was gripping her hand in her sleep. "What the hell is she doing?" Bruce barked, slamming the laptop shut and grabbing his coat. "Why wasn't I informed that Sophie had another fever?" "We didn't want to bother you during the investor call," Mark replied quickly. "And the nanny, Linda, said it wasn't an emergency. She insisted she could manage." "She's not authorized to make that decision," Bruce snapped. "No one sleeps in my daughter's room unless I say so. She crossed the line." Minutes later, Bruce stepped quietly into the house, bypassing the staff with a curt nod. The hallway to Sophie's room was dimly lit. His polished shoes made no sound on the thick carpet as he approached the nursery. He opened the door slowly. The soft hum of a white noise machine filled the room. And there they were, exactly as the camera showed. Linda, barely 20-something, was curled on the wooden floor beside the crib. No pillow, no blanket, except for a child's throw draped over her knees. Her hand still reached through the bars, fingers laced with Sophie's tiny ones. Sophie, usually restless even in sleep, was still, her breathing slow, steady. Bruce's anger began to shift, first into confusion, then into something harder to name. His daughter, who screamed at every stranger, who clung to him with panicked sobs during her last illness, now slept peacefully, holding onto the hand of someone she had met just days ago. He stepped closer. Linda's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his approach. She didn't scramble to her feet. She didn't even let go of Sophie's hand. She just blinked, then looked up at him calmly. "Is she okay?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with sleep. Her fever broke around 2 a.m., but she was still shaking. "I didn't want to leave her alone." Bruce stared. He had expected excuses, fear, maybe even defensiveness. But all he saw was concern, pure and undiluted. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. "You were in meetings." And she needed sleep more than she needed noise or panic. Linda slowly pulled her hand back, careful not to wake Sophie. She cried for hours. This was the only thing that soothed her. Bruce looked down at the young woman on his floor, the woman he had labeled temporary, replaceable, just another name on a payroll list. There was no sign of pretense in her expression, no agenda, no guilt. He knelt slowly beside the crib, brushing a hand gently across Sophie's forehead. Her skin was warm, but no longer hot. Her cheeks flushed, but peaceful. And in her sleep, she murmured something soft. "Ma," she whispered. Bruce froze. It couldn't be. He looked back at Linda, who now sat up, arms wrapped around her knees. Her tired eyes met his. "I know I crossed a line," she said quietly. "But I would do it again if it meant keeping her safe." Bruce didn't respond, not with words. He simply nodded, stood, and left the room, closing the door behind him as gently as possible. In the silence of the hallway, his thoughts swirled with questions he wasn't ready to answer. About this woman, about his daughter, about himself. He had expected to walk in and find someone taking advantage of his trust. Instead, he had found someone holding his daughter's hand through the night. And that realization, simple, human, undeniable, left him more shaken than anything else could. Bruce Marley stood alone in his study, the soft amber light from the desk lamp casting long shadows on the polished oak. A glass of untouched whiskey sat beside a closed laptop, the screen dark, its blinking cursor long forgotten. His thoughts weren't on business tonight. They were on a different screen, on the image of a young woman sleeping beside his child, and the strange quiet in his heart that followed. He hadn't felt this unsettled in years, not since the day his wife walked out. She had been dazzling, charming, intelligent, the kind of woman who could own a room without saying a word. But charm, he had learned, could be cruel. Beneath the surface, she craved a different kind of attention. And when Sophie was just 6 months old, she found it, in the arms of one of Bruce's closest business partners. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was methodical, surgical. By the time Bruce uncovered the affair, she had already emptied her closet and half his dignity. Her final words were chilling in their precision. "You were always better at deals than people." He hadn't heard from her since. In the months that followed, Bruce buried himself in work. He expanded operations, acquired new holdings, doubled the company's revenue in under a year. Investors praised his vision. Forbes called him the silent architect. But they didn't know the truth. He wasn't building. He was hiding, because every time he looked into his daughter's eyes, he saw the one thing he couldn't buy, win, or repair: a child who didn't understand why her mother had vanished. Sophie had always been quiet, even for a toddler. Doctors labeled it sensory-emotional resistance, a mild developmental condition that made her cautious around unfamiliar people. New faces overwhelmed her. Touch made her flinch. Voices had to be soft, consistent. For Bruce, it was a daily reminder that some things could not be fixed with money. He had hired specialists, therapists, elite nannies with glowing resumes. Most lasted a week, a few stayed a month, but none of them ever earned Sophie's trust. She cried in their arms, refused their food. Once, she had hidden in a closet for nearly 2 hours, until Bruce returned. Then came Linda. She wasn't even on his radar. She was a last-minute fill-in from an agency he barely remembered hiring. They had sent her after the previous nanny quit without notice, citing emotional exhaustion. He almost canceled the assignment, but Mark, his assistant, had insisted. "Just give her a day or two. She's quiet, competent, and honestly, she seems to care." Bruce didn't believe in care. He believed in contracts. But he agreed, mostly because he didn't have time to interview anyone else that week. Linda arrived without fanfare, blonde hair tied back, eyes tired but observant. She asked no personal questions. She smiled gently but didn't overstep. And most importantly, she didn't try too hard. Bruce noticed that. She didn't come bearing flashy toys or exaggerated voices. She simply sat on the floor, opened a picture book, and waited. Sophie didn't run. But she didn't hide either. That was already something. 2 days turned into 5. 5 turned into 10. He had planned to replace her once he had time. But that time never came. And then the night happened. The fever. The hand through the crib. The peace that followed. Bruce took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the whiskey glass. He hadn't slept through the night since his wife left. Every night since, his sleep had been broken by Sophie's cries, by his own guilt, by nightmares he never admitted having. But last night he had woken up to stillness. No screaming, no panic, just the odd, unsettling quiet of someone else doing the job he had failed to do. And not for money, not for praise, just because she chose to care. Bruce walked over to the fireplace and stared at the photo above the mantel. It was the last family picture taken before the divorce. Sophie was still a baby, red-cheeked and sleepy in her father's arms. His ex-wife smiled tightly, her eyes already drifting elsewhere. He took the frame down and set it inside a drawer. Then, with a decision that surprised even himself, he pulled out his phone and opened the agency app. Linda was still listed as temporary fill-in. He clicked Extend Contract. When the prompt asked for duration, he selected Indefinite. He wasn't ready to trust her completely. Not yet, but he wanted to know more. Not about her resume, not about her credentials, about how someone with so little could make his daughter feel like she had everything. And why, for the first time in years, Bruce Marley had started to wonder if maybe He didn't have to do this alone anymore. It began with a giggle. Bruce had just stepped into the hallway outside the playroom when he heard it. A tiny burst of laughter, high-pitched and pure. He paused mid-step. Sophie rarely laughed. Not around people. Not since. He moved closer, just enough to peer inside without being seen. There they were. Linda sat cross-legged on the floor, a coloring book open between her and Sophie. The toddler had a crayon in each fist, scribbling wildly across the pages. Her hair was tied into a messy little puff, and her cheeks were flushed with delight. "Purple sun?" Linda teased gently. "You're an artist ahead of your time." Sophie grinned and babbled something unintelligible, clearly pleased with herself. She looked up at Linda and clapped her tiny hands. Then came the moment Bruce would replay in his head for days. Sophie leaned forward, touched Linda's cheek with her crayon-stained fingers and said, clear as day, "Ma'am." Bruce's stomach dropped. He stepped back, out of sight, heart pounding harder than it should have. That word, Mommy, Sophie had never said it before, not once, not even for her real mother. And now, after just 2 weeks, she was saying it to a stranger? Later that evening, Bruce confronted Linda in the kitchen. She was rinsing bottles at the sink, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly damp from Sophie's bath. "She called you something today," he said without preamble. Linda turned, puzzled. "She calls me a lot of things," she said. "Mommy," a beat of silence. "Oh," Linda said softly. "I didn't encourage that, I swear." Bruce folded his arms. "You don't think that's confusing for her?" "I think she's trying to name the feeling," Linda replied gently. "Someone who holds her, comforts her, stays when she's scared. To her, that's what Mommy means." Bruce opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. That night he stayed up late in his home office, the nursery monitor open on his screen. Sophie had caught another fever, mild but enough to make her restless. He expected Linda to alert him. Instead, around midnight, he saw her scoop Sophie into her arms, whisper something soothing, and settle onto the rocking chair with the toddler curled against her chest. She didn't sleep. She didn't even check her phone. For hours she simply held the child, humming a soft lullaby that Bruce didn't recognize. It was maternal, too maternal, and yet not performative, not rehearsed. Linda wasn't acting. She was simply being. Bruce found himself asking questions he wasn't ready for. Why did she care so much? What drove her to be so attentive, so consistent, so gentle? And why, despite everything, did it make him feel both grateful and threatened? The next morning, Sophie was better. Fever gone, appetite back. She ran to Linda when she entered the room, arms raised in demand. Linda scooped her up without hesitation, spinning her gently until giggles erupted again. Bruce stood at the doorway, watching. 1,000 instincts warred inside him. Jealousy, relief, fear, wonder. "Why does she only smile at you?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. Linda didn't hear, but Sophie did. She turned, spotted her father, and waved. "Daddy," she chirped. Bruce blinked. That, too, was a first, and in that moment, standing between two people who had somehow stitched his broken world into something whole, Bruce Marley realized something terrifying. He didn't understand how Linda had gotten here, but he was already afraid of losing her. Bruce stood at the edge of the back porch, arms crossed, coffee growing cold in his hand. The early morning sun painted the grass in soft gold. It was quiet, except for the small staccato sounds of laughter drifting up from the yard. There they were. Linda knelt barefoot in the grass, both hands gently holding Sophie's tiny fists as the toddler took slow, wobbly steps toward her stuffed bear. Her curls bounced with every step. Her mouth was open in joyous squeals. Linda was not guiding her, she was simply holding space. "Good job, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're so brave." Sophie burst into laughter. A full, uninhibited laugh that Bruce hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. He felt something crack inside. That night, Bruce sat in his dim study, bathed in silence. A single lamp glowed above his desk, illuminating an open laptop. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. He opened his inbox, searched for an old contact, found it. Dr. Sandler, pediatric neurodevelopment specialist. He had booked and canceled this appointment 3 times. Each time, the idea of confronting his own shortcomings had been too much. But now, his fingers moved slowly across the keys. Subject, regarding Sophie, body. I no longer believe my daughter needs another clinical report. She needs someone real. And I think she may have already found that. He hit send. Bruce leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. For 2 years, he had thrown money at every problem. Therapists, dietitians, sleep specialists. He had believed solutions could be bought, just like everything else in his life. But no expert had ever drawn that laughter out of Sophie. No program had ever made her run barefoot on the lawn, eyes shining with light. Only Linda had, with no certification, no script, no degree. Just her hands, her calm voice, and the quiet kind of presence that didn't ask for recognition. Bruce sat in the dark, the question circling him like smoke. Have I been raising my daughter, or just keeping her alive? Hours passed. He didn't sleep. At 3:27 a.m., the monitor buzzed. Sophie's breathing was ragged. Then came the crying, sharp, panicked. Bruce dropped his mug. It shattered on the floor. He rushed to the nursery. Sophie was curled on her side, flushed with fever. Her eyes blinked open, but didn't focus. She whimpered, confused, arms flailing. When Bruce reached for her, she recoiled. No, no, she sobbed weakly. Mommy! Bruce froze. He wasn't offended. He was devastated, because in her moment of fear, she didn't recognize him. Not as comfort, not as safety. Only one person could get through. He sprinted down the hallway. Linda's room was dark. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open. Linda, Sophie's burning up. She's asking for you. Linda didn't wait. She threw on a sweater, rushed past him barefoot, and within seconds was at the child's bedside. Oh, baby, she whispered, kneeling. Sophie reached for her. Linda pulled her into her lap, cradled her close, forehead pressed to the toddler's burning skin. Her voice cracked as she began to hum, the same lullaby Bruce had heard before, soft, trembling but steady. Tears filled his eyes. He had never known what it meant to feel helpless until now, not because he couldn't solve the problem, but because someone else already had. Linda sat on the edge of the rocking chair, rocking slowly, Sophie clinging to her like a lifeline. She'll be okay, Linda said quietly, more to herself than to him. I've got her. Bruce leaned against the doorway, face buried in his hand, and cried for the first time in years. Not because of failure, but because something in him, some cold, protected corner, had finally thawed, and it hurt in the most beautiful way. The smell hit her first, burnt batter and blueberries? Linda walked into the kitchen, barefoot, tying her robe tighter as she paused at the doorframe. It was 7 a.m. on a Sunday. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then she saw him, Bruce, wearing a black t-shirt and gray pajama pants, sleeves slightly rolled. He stood at the stove, armed with a spatula and a frying pan that looked way too hot. There were pancakes on a plate. Well, something that resembled pancakes. Some were misshapen, others were too thick. One was charred beyond hope. He didn't notice her at first. Lyndon leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. I did not take you for a pancake guy. Bruce jumped slightly, then chuckled. That makes 2 of us. She stepped closer, eyeing the batter bowl. What's the occasion? He looked sheepish, running a hand through his already tousled hair. Sophie said she liked the ones you made last week. I figured, maybe I could try. Linda smiled. She'll love that. Bruce turned the stove off, then leaned back against the counter. I haven't cooked anything since college, and that was mostly ramen. She laughed. Well, this is a step up. He looked at her, really looked. His voice was quieter now. I've never known what to do for her. I thought, if I hired the best, gave her everything, she'd be okay. Linda didn't respond at first. Then, softly, she said, she doesn't need perfect pancakes. She needs to know her dad stood in a kitchen at 7 a.m. and tried. He exhaled slowly. I'm not great at this, Linda. No one is, she replied. But you're trying, and that counts for more than you think. Bruce looked down at the half-burnt pancakes, then back at her. What about you? What about me? What do you need? Linda hesitated, caught off guard. She looked down, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Her voice was soft, but firm. A place where I'm not just temporary. That's all. Bruce blinked. Something about the way she said it. It was not a plea. It was a quiet truth, one that settled in his chest with unexpected weight. He wanted to say something, but she was already moving, grabbing a plate, arranging the least burnt pancakes with practiced care. That morning, they ate with Sophie at the breakfast nook. The little girl clapped with joy, blueberry syrup smeared on her cheeks, giggling at the odd shapes of the pancakes. Bruce didn't correct her when she called them daddy cakes. He just watched her smile, and he watched Linda smile too. The next morning, Linda woke up earlier than usual. When she stepped into the hallway, something caught her eye. The door at the end of the corridor, the one that had always been closed, was ajar. She walked toward it slowly. Inside, the room was freshly painted, softly lit. A small dresser stood by the wall. A warm-colored rug lay underfoot. There was a neatly made bed, a reading chair, and a shelf with a few books, some of them ones she had read to Sophie. But what made her stop was the wooden plaque hung carefully on the door. Engraved in neat cursive, Linda, family room. She brought a hand to her mouth. No speech, no big announcement, just that. A space, a name, a place that said, you're not just passing through, you belong. And that morning, for the first time in years, Linda cried not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen. The park was quiet that afternoon, the sun casting golden beams through the trees as the breeze rustled fallen leaves along the walking path. Sophie ran ahead, clutching a small notebook and a box of crayons in her chubby hands. Linda followed at her pace, her soft laughter carrying across the lawn as Sophie picked the perfect spot beneath a maple tree. Bruce trailed behind them, hands in his pockets, his steps slower than usual. For once, he was not thinking about meetings or deadlines. For once, he wasn't Bruce Connor, the CEO. He was just Sophie's father, and he was watching the two people who had slowly, unexpectedly become the center of his world. Sophie dropped to the grass and opened her notebook, scribbling circles and stick figures with excitement. Linda sat beside her, brushing blonde curls behind Sophie's ear and pointing to the sky. Look how the leaves dance, sweetheart. Use the orange, like that one there. Bruce stood a few feet away, silently observing the interaction. His chest tightened, not from discomfort, but from something deeper, something unfamiliar. Trust. He sat down a few feet from them, elbows resting on his knees. You're good with her, he said. Linda looked up. She makes it easy. Bruce smiled faintly. She didn't used to. No, Lyndon agreed. But you kept her safe. That's why she opened up. He was quiet a moment, then looked out at the trees. My mother died before I turned 30, he said. She raised me alone after my dad left. Never asked for anything. Worked 3 jobs. When I made my first $1 million, I bought her a condo on the coast. Linda said nothing, sensing the weight in his voice. Home night. I called her after a deal went south. I was a mess. Angry. She didn't say much, just told me to come home and let it hurt. He swallowed hard. I flew back. Didn't even pack a bag. She made me soup, wrapped me in a blanket, and let me cry on her lap like I was 10 again. That was the last time I saw her. She passed in her sleep 2 days later. Heart failure. Linda reached across the blanket and took his hand. Her grip was warm, steady. I thought if I had enough money, Bruce continued, voice low, I could stop anyone I loved from ever feeling pain like that again. I thought I could buy safety, security, love. Linda squeezed his hand gently. Love isn't safe, she whispered. It's brave. That night, back at the house, Linda was folding laundry on the living room couch. Bruce sat nearby, watching her methodically fold Sophie's tiny t-shirts, matching socks, into neat little balls. I don't know how you do that, he said. She smiled. Years of practice. Show me, he asked. She looked at him, surprised. You want to learn how to fold laundry? I want to learn what matters to her. Linda nodded. Okay, start with the sleeves. They sat there for an hour, folding together. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The rhythm of shared space, shared purpose. It was enough. Later that evening, Sophie toddled into the room, her notebook pressed to her chest. Daddy, she said. Bruce looked up. Yes, Peanut? Sophie held out the notebook with both hands. I drawed something, she beamed. Bruce took the paper gently and unfolded it. A crayon drawing. 3 stick figures under a red triangle roof. A sun in the corner. A flower. 2 names written in clumsy block letters. Daddy and Linda, and in Sophie's tiny scrawl below it, my home. Bruce stared at it, unable to speak. Linda leaned in to see. Her breath caught in her throat. Sophie crawled into Bruce's lap and pointed. That's you? That's Linda. That's me. We all live here. Bruce looked at Linda, and for the first time, without fear or hesitation, she smiled and said, Yes, sweetheart. We do. He folded the drawing carefully, reverently, like a sacred object, because somehow, between sleepless nights, folding laundry, and walks in the park, something had shifted. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something that felt a lot like family. It was late. The house had settled into its usual quiet hum, dishwasher running in the kitchen, a low wind rustling through the backyard trees, and the steady rhythm of Sophie's soft breathing echoing through the baby monitor on Bruce's nightstand. Everything appeared peaceful on the surface. But inside Bruce's chest, a storm was brewing. He sat on the edge of his bed, his elbows on his knees, phone still glowing in his grip. The screen displayed an email, short, clinical, and devastating. Subject: Request from Jessica Connor. Message: Your ex-wife has formally requested visitation rights with Sophie. She plans to return next week. Bruce's jaw tightened. His pulse thudded in his ears. He stared at the message, reading it again, as if the words would shift and offer a different meaning. But Jessica, she had not called, had not sent a card, not even an email on Sophie's birthday. She had vanished from their lives 2 years ago, without a word of explanation or apology. And now, without warning, she wanted back in. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room, one hand still clenched around his phone. His chest ached, not from the surprise, but from the fury. Not for himself, but for that little girl down the hall, the girl who had clung to a picture of her mother for months, who had woken up screaming some nights, too young to put words to her grief. He could not let Jessica walk in and tear open those wounds again. Sophie was finally happy. Whole. The door creaked slightly. Soft footsteps padded in. Linda. She stood in the doorway, barefoot, wrapped in a cozy cardigan. Her blonde hair fell loosely over her shoulder, and her expression was calm but attentive, as if she had sensed the shift in the air even before entering the room. You're angry, she said gently. Bruce didn't look at her. She's coming back. She wants to see Sophie. Just like that. Linda stepped inside, her arms loosely crossed in front of her. And you want to protect her. He let out a dry laugh. Of course I do. That woman walked out on her. On us. She doesn't get to waltz back in now that everything's working. Linda nodded. And what are you going to do, pretend she never existed? He turned sharply to her, eyes blazing. I'm not going to let Jessica confuse her again. Sophie doesn't need her. She has us. She has love, Linda said softly. But she'll have questions one day. She'll want to know who left and why. If you hide the truth now, it won't stay buried. It'll just grow into something else: doubt, pain, mistrust. Bruce's chest rose and fell, his breathing uneven. Linda stepped closer. Let her see the truth. Let her feel it for herself. Don't make the choice for her. Give her the power to choose who she trusts, not because of silence, but because of clarity. He stared at her for a long moment. Then his shoulders fell, the fire in his chest dimmed to a quiet ache. The next day, Jessica arrived. Sophie was on the living room rug, stacking her wooden blocks into a wobbly tower. Bruce stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, his eyes like ice. Jessica walked in, dressed like she had stepped out of a glossy magazine. "Hi, baby," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. Sophie paused, looked up at her. Then, without a word, she turned, climbed into Linda's lap, and wrapped her tiny arms around her waist. She rested her head against Linda's chest and whispered with quiet certainty, "I already have a mommy." Jessica stood frozen. Her smile faltered, then vanished. Bruce said nothing. He didn't have to. His eyes never left Linda's face. That night, after Sophie had drifted into sleep, Linda moved slowly down the hallway. Her suitcase sat by the door. She had seen too much to believe this fairy tale would last forever. Kindness, she had learned, was rarely permanent. Her fingers brushed the doorknob. Then, footsteps. Bruce appeared behind her, silent. He stepped close and, without hesitation, wrapped his arms gently around her waist. She froze for a moment, then relaxed, leaning back into him. "Don't go," he whispered, voice low, raw, and certain. "You're already home." 1 year later, the house felt different, not just because of the new curtains Linda had chosen, or the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing down the hallways, but because something invisible had settled inside the walls, something solid, something sacred, calm. Bruce had stepped down from the daily operations of his corporation 6 months ago, handing over control to a trusted partner. He had built a legacy in business, but now he wanted to build something softer, something that could not be measured in numbers. He and Linda had launched a foundation, the Sophie Grace Fund, a non-profit that provided care, support, and educational resources for children who had lost their mothers. It was Linda's name on the letterhead, her voice in the mission statement, and her heart in every decision. Bruce had never seen her more radiant. Sophie was now 3. Bright-eyed, confident. She ran through the backyard with finger paints in her hands, squealing with joy, dragging Bruce and Linda with her like gravity. Come on," she giggled, holding out the paintbrushes. Bruce crouched beside her as Linda laid out a canvas of white-primed plywood against the backyard wall. It was their weekend project, something Sophie had insisted on. "We paint our home," she had declared. Bruce handed her the smallest brush and dipped it in yellow paint. "You lead, boss," he said with a grin. Sophie, ever the artist, pressed her palm into the yellow and slapped it onto the wall, then another in blue, then one in green. She turned to Bruce. "You do it too, Daddy?" He hesitated for a moment, then dipped his palm into red and placed it right next to hers. Linda followed with purple, laughing as Sophie grabbed both her arms and stamped her elbows on the bottom row. When they stepped back, the wall was a messy, beautiful patchwork of colors, handprints, and smiles. But right in the middle, Sophie grabbed a brush and, with Linda's help, wrote in big, wobbly letters, "Home is here." Bruce felt his throat tighten. He looked at Sophie, her blonde curls streaked with paint, and then at Linda, her hands stained, her eyes bright, her laughter effortless. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand gently on Linda's shoulder. She turned toward him, eyebrows raised. Bruce took a breath. "I used to think I lost everything when Jessica left. My wife, my trust, my future." He looked at Sophie, now crouching to paint hearts at the bottom of the wall. "But the truth is, I was just being emptied, so I could be filled with something real." Linda didn't speak. She didn't need to. Bruce stepped closer. "I was waiting for someone who looked like the past," he said softly. "But I found someone who looks like everything ahead." She blinked, stunned. "You," he added, brushing a paint smear from her cheek, "are not the woman who stayed through obligation. You're the woman who chose to stay when she had every reason not to." Linda swallowed hard. "So what now?" Bruce smiled. "Now, we raise this girl, love this life, and never forget what it cost to find it." Linda leaned in. "And what it's worth to keep it." As the sun dipped below the trees and painted the yard in golden light, the three of them stood before their mural of handprints, hearts, and colors. None of it perfect. All of it true. Sophie looked up and tugged on Linda's shirt. "Mommy?" "Yes, baby. I like our house now." Lyndon looked at Bruce. "Me too." And Bruce, for the first time in his life, did not just agree, he believed it. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, do not forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Every week we bring you powerful tales of love, resilience, and the quiet miracles that shape our lives. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and remember, sometimes, family is not who you are born to, but who chooses to stay. Thank you for watching.